Okay, we are recording now. This is May the 4th, and a couple of things I want to talk about right off the bat is I haven't done this probably in a couple of lessons, and I want to kind of go back and revisit this. Um, what this class is Leaving Christianity Now What? And I want to reemphasize again that this is not about bashing Christians. This is Um, and the reason for that is everybody that I know that is in the Noahide movement came out of Christianity. And even a couple of lessons ago, I threw up a slide there from some polls um, that were done by some independent polling agencies that showed that within the last decade, 12% of the people that claim to be Christians or proclaim to be Christians um, have no longer are there 12% are no longer claiming to be Christians. In other words, they have left the Christian faith and no longer are claiming to be Christians. Um, Now that's a staggering number when you figure there's 2 to 3 billion Christians in the world. 12% drop is a huge number, but even probably more concerning is that is it did not poll those who were still Christians but have left the church and are not going to church. So um, Christians are actually seeing. I don't know how to explain this exactly. It's kind of like in the age that we live in, the movies that we see, say like the Marvel comic movies, the Spider Man, the Captain America, Iron Man. Those are actually probably more well thought out and edited, that they have less errors than in the New Testament. The New Testament is so full of errors, and I've never talked to a former Christian or even a current Christian that you can have this conversation with that there was something that did not bother them about the Gospels and the epistles of Paul. There's always something in there that just did not set well with them. So anyway, like I say, this is not about bashing Christians. I mean, for the last, however many, centuries, that Christianity has done a wonderful job of being a feeding the poor and helping people throughout the world. And so I'm not negating that. We are going to test some of the Christian doctrine. We're going to put it under a microscope and see how it tests out. So now, having said all that, and the second thing I want to talk about real quick is maybe you guys wonder why am I wearing this hat? Well, when this class first started back in March, I was already about 3 or 4 weeks behind getting a haircut, and then shortly after my first class, we went into the shelter in place, and all the salons and barber shops were shut down. So now I'm about 8 or 10 weeks late getting a haircut, and my hair is just I hide it under a hat. So all right, enough of that. Let's get on with the class for tonight. Now, one of the most compelling arguments within Christianity, and I'm going to close out my chat room here so I enhance my screen so I won't be able to see y'all uh, in the chat room. One of the most compelling arguments for Christianity was when at least for me, was back in the 70s. There was a book that came out, and it was by Josh McDowell in his book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And in that book, he listed a number of prophecies and the odds of probability, the law of compounding probability. Now, a couple of years ago, I ran across an article in which I think was probably from his official website or something directly affiliated with him. And I went back and I tried to find that article and I couldn't find it, but I found another one that is basically the same thing. And even though this particular article is not from Josh McDowell, it is on the same principle and same lines. So anyway, in Josh McDowell's book, he states that the laws of compounding probability are that if even just 8, and by the way, I think Josh McDowell had something like 340 predictions or prophecies that were fulfilled. This online article that I got they increased it to 365. So one for every day of the year. But if using the law of compounding probabilities, and they quote this Professor Stoner, that if Jesus just fulfilled eight of the 365 prophecies, the odds of completion would be, and this is certainly mind-boggling, it's 1 in 10 with 17 zeros, which there's no name for that. Which is a staggering number. In fact, they try to put it into a what's the word I'm trying to say? They tried to put it into something that you could understand, and they basically said that with that a number of zeros, it would be equivalent to the state of Texas would be covered with silver coins 2 feet deep, and then asking a person to walk across the state blindfolded and reach down and pick out one silver dollar 2 feet deep across the whole state of Texas, and then that would be the odds of 1 in that number. Then if you just added one more prophecy, that would be 1 in 10 with 28 zeros times 1 in 10 with 17 zeros, and then that would make it something to the degree of 1 in 10 with 45 zeros. And the odds are so staggering that it's you can't even, it's almost impossible to comprehend. I mean, and then if you use all 365 of them, it just gets absolutely ridiculous. Like there's more zeros than there are atoms in our known universe or something like that. They didn't say that. I just made that up. But you can see how it compounds. So even as a really devout Christian back in the 1970s, I looked at this and two things. One is when I saw the prophecies, I started questioning some of those prophecies as if they were legit. They sounded kind of cheesy to me. But the second thing I questioned was I saw that there were probably only two possibilities that in which this could exist, and the two models, so to speak. The first model would be, the Christian model, in that God is an omnipotent God, and being an omnipotent God, He could create the situation and the prophecies and then order the life of Jesus and direct his life, that he would go through life and fulfill all 365 of these prophecies. And therefore, it was beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus was obviously not only the Messiah, but he was also the Son of God. The second model that I came to understand is what I am going to call the Forrest Gump model. Now, this takes a little explaining here, and I'm hoping everybody who sees this live or recorded will remember the movie Forrest Gump. And if you remember the movie of Forrest Gump, it was about a physically challenged young boy, and he was not only physically challenged as a young boy, but he was somewhat slow. He was somewhat mentally challenged as well, but he led an extraordinary life in the fact that there were certain events that happened in his life that were extraordinary events, which led to a very extraordinary life. In other words, Elvis Presley did exist. Elvis Presley did do hip gyration, and it did drive the girls crazy. That's a true fact. Alabama did win a national championship under the legendary Paul Bryant. That's a fact. There was a war in Vietnam. That's a fact. LBJ did award a Medal of Honor to a soldier that was shot in the buttocks. That's a fact. Richard Nixon did institute a ping pong policy with China. That's a fact. So what the writers of Forrest Gump basically did is they took these events in history and they weave the story around these events in history to where at the end of the story, like I say, it takes a very average or below average person who lives in a very extraordinary life in that he intersected with some historical events of his timeline that no human being would have the opportunity to do. Now, while this movie was very entertaining, it was far from the truth. And so, but the Forrest Gump model is something like that. And well, no, it is like that in the fact that it is my belief that the writers of the New Testament took basically they mined the or searched the scriptures. And when I say search the scriptures, they went mining, they went digging for prophecies, and they came up with a list of prophecies, and they started to weave a story of Jesus around these prophecies so that he would fulfill these prophecies. And thus we get the story of Jesus with 365 prophecies. Now, we're going to take a look at some of that tonight and see if some of these things hold up to water. And we'll let you be the judge as to whether you think that these are legitimate prophecies or not. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I noticed in this article was that they're padding the numbers. What I mean by padding the numbers, they're listing, well, here, David's seed. It is listed 6 times. Well, that's not 6 different prophecies. That's one prophecy that's listed 6 times. You know, if you're born of David's seed, you're only born once. You're not born 6 times. And so this list of 365 prophecies have multiple prophecies that have multiple times. And so they seem to be just adding numbers just to create 365. And so, I mean, to me, this is certainly dishonest, unethical. It's cheating. Let's just call it what it is. It's cheating, you know? And so that was one of the first things that caught my attention. And then when we go through the list here, I mean, we don't have to go very far. I mean, the very first one on the list is the seed of woman is equating that to the virgin birth. Now we go to the scripture that they used, and that is, of course, Genesis 3:15, and this is out of the King James Version, and it says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. It has nothing to say about a virgin birth there. Now, you know how I am about taking things in context. So if we go back one verse and read 3:14 and 15, which I'm going to do here from my notes, and it says that, and the Lord God said to the serpent, this is where he is pronouncing curses to the serpent. Because you have done this, cursed be you more than all the cattle and more than all the beasts of the field. You shall walk on your belly, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I shall place hatred between you and between the woman, and between her seed and between your seed and her seed. He will crush your head, and you will bite his heel. Basically, what this is saying is, the serpent is cursed, and mankind is going to hate the snakes, especially women. And, you know, with a very, very few exceptions, you show me a woman and I'll show you someone who hates snakes. I mean, and how you get rid of a snake is you basically stomp on his head. Well, my wife, in her case, she'll take a shovel to it. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of snake it is. She will take a shovel to it, bang it till it's unconscious, and put the shovel on its head and jump up on the shovel and just cut its head off. She hates snakes. Now, she loves everything else, but she hates snakes. And so this is part of the curse of the serpent. The next one, which is this is just almost makes me mad, and this is number 4 on the list, and it says that the god of Shem will be the son of Shem. Now, and what they're using here for scriptural reference makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Let's go ahead and read it here. Genesis 9:24 through 27. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out that what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Now, this was when he woke up and found out what his youngest son had done to him. His youngest son was Ham, but he cursed Ham's son, which is Canaan. The lowest of slaves would be his brothers. He also said, "Praise be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be a slave to Shem." Now, what they're trying to say here is that the god of Shem would be the son of Shem. In other words, the son or the descendant of Shem would ultimately be Jesus Christ one day, because Jesus was God, but he would also be a descendant of Shem and be the son of Shem, which makes absolutely no sense at all, because when you go to their proof text, which is in Luke 35 through 36, it's Luke 3 is where they are listing the genealogy of Jesus. And so it says the son of Shirag, the son of Ruah, son of Peleg, the son of Aber, the son of Shelah, the son of Cain, a different Cain spelled differently, because remember, this Cain that Noah cursed is a son of Ham. This Cain is a son of Shem. It's a different Cain altogether. The son of Aphax, the son of Shem, the son of Noah, the son of Lamech. Okay, so this prophecy makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and there is no scriptural justification for this. This is a prophecy that is just created out of thin air and has absolutely no basis to stand on at all. I know, I'm getting a little upset. um, the next one, we still haven't even probably got out of the first 10 yet. And like I say, there's 365, and trust me, guys, we're not going to go through all 365. I actually considered, making this a teaching all in itself and go through all 365, but no, you don't need to. 8 or 10 of these, and you're convinced that this is a list that was created by and large just out of thin air. So the next one is Genesis 22:8. And that is that God is going to provide an offering. And I know that you guys have heard this many, many times if you've sat in pews for the decades that many of you have. And it says, Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went together. And of course, their justification for this is that God provides an offering is in John. And the next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him. He said, "Look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." In other words, because God provided a sacrifice in lieu of Isaac, Christians believe that that automatically had to be John's version, the Lamb of God, the Passover lamb. A couple of things I want to state here. Well, I'll get to it here in a second. Let's what I'm going to do right now, and I did this a couple of weeks ago and it worked out, but I'm going to go offline and we're going to go and take a look at a concordance, because I want y'all to see something here about the lamb. So I am going to hang on just a second. And the reason I'm doing this is because sometimes it takes a while for this to kick in to you guys. And so I'm looking at it on my other computer, and when it kicks in, then I know that you're seeing it. And so you should not have it yet. You should have a couple of circles circling around, and you should get it here in a second. I don't want to start talking. I don't want to start doing this until you guys have it on your screen. And so I'm kind of waiting till you guys get that. I'm going to take a drink in the meantime. If you don't get it here in a second, then we'll just go on without it. And it looks like it's taking a lot longer than what I thought it was going to take. I tried this earlier this afternoon and it worked fine, but I don't know how it works with multiple users. So, all right. Anyway, I'm not going to do this any longer. Oh, you got it. You got it. Okay. What we're looking at here, this is a concordance, and this is from, Strong's Concordance. And Genesis 22:7, and it says, Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, son. He said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Okay, now, I typed in lamb and I got this, but we're looking at this number here. If you can see it on my cursor, 87716. Isaac is not looking for a lamb per se. And when we click on this number here, okay, good, you got it. The transliteration is sheh, S-E-H. Okay, and we go down here, and did I go too far? Yeah, you got it. When we go down here, on the King translates Strong's as this: sheep 18 times, cattle 10 times, lamb 16, ewe, and lamb. Okay, so what he's saying here is this is animals from a domestic flock. These are domesticated animals that include sheep, cattle, and goats. Okay? Underneath that it says one of a flock or herd, because cattle are considered herds and sheep and goats are considered flocks. And then down here, the Strong's definition, it says through the idea of pushing out graze, a member of a flock, a sheep or goat, lesser cattle or lesser small cattle, ewe, goat, lamb, sheep. Okay, so what this definition is here, it's not necessarily a sheep per se. It can be a sheep, but it also can be a goat, and it also can be a bull. Now, hang on just a second. I want to. Okay. So, incidentally, these domesticated animals, the sheep, the goats, and the cattle, were all used in either for sin sacrifice or for burnt offerings later on in the desert. Now, I want you to look at Exodus 12:5 here. Now, we looked at lamb, which is 7716 here. See my arrow. Take that out of the way. We looked at 7716 here. Now, it says your lamb, but then it goes on and says take out of the sheep. Well, a lamb is a sheep. So why is he making differential here, a difference between sheep and lamb? So you go to lamb, which is 3532, and now we have it's translated lamb 105 times, sheep 2 times. This word is used exclusively for sheep and lambs. Now, if we go back to that same thing and look up goats, and we see that this is goat 63 times, kid 5 times kid, 4 times kids. Okay. So what is saying here is when Isaac was asking, he was asking not for a lamb, he was asking for a sheh, S-E-H, one of a domestic flock, which could either be cattle, goats, or sheep. Now, let me get back to. Oh, oh, I'm so proud that worked. Um, so with that, let's go on. So um, anyway, my point being here is that look, you guys know that I am not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I mean, if I can go to concordance and look at this and figure this out, then that is obviously not what Isaac was saying. He's saying, "Oh, I need a small white lamb here. Where is the small white lamb?" No, he got a ram, okay, which is also a sheh. It part of the domestic flock. Okay, so going on, we have another one, and this was saved from the wrath. Oops, let me get back to my notes here. Um, all this was saved from the wrath of the Romans. Now, their scripture for the prophecy is in Exodus, and their scripture for the fulfillment of that prophecy is in Romans. So when you look at it, it says in Exodus, the blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. And so they're claiming that the blood saves them from the wrath of the Romans, but their proof text is anything but. It says, now, since we have been justified by his blood, how much more will we be saved from God's wrath through him? So I don't know why they would equate God's wrath with the wrath of the Romans as if God is in cahoots with the Romans, and it just doesn't make sense. Basically, what this is, and this is, I'm just going to call it what it is. This is a bait and switch. In other words, when when you want to create, I guess, a prophet, so to speak, you demonstrate a truth. Well, the truth is, yeah, the blood on the houses was, and this has just recently happened in Passover. The recently had Passover. The blood on the doorpost was for the angel of death to pass over. That was a truth. Now you demonstrate a truth, and then you take that truth and you introduce something in there that's some fiction or that is not true, and then it certainly appears to be true. And then the goal, of course, is to try to get you to accept the fact that this is a messianic prophecy about Jesus, and you have to ignore everything else about Jesus and his mission or the Messiah's mission, and you make Jesus Messiah when you've switched things up, and it just sorry, it just doesn't make any sense. This is one that I know that you guys are probably familiar with, and so I wanted to kind of go over this one again. So here is their proof text. The proof text is in Hosea 11:1, and their New Testament proof text was in Matthew 2:14 and 15. So it says that Joseph got up and left for Egypt during the night with the child and his mother. And Joseph stayed in Egypt until Herod died. This happened to bring about fulfillment of what the Lord had said through the prophet. I called my son out of Egypt. Now, when you even look in the expanded Bible, it has a note there. Of course, that it there has to refer to Hosea 11:1 because this is where it's quoting from. But their note there, it says that Jesus fulfills the role of of Israel by leading a spiritual exodus. What spiritual exodus did he lead? And there's no scriptural justification for that statement. And this is Matthew 25:15 in another version, and it says, "Out of Egypt I had called my son," and then of course it quotes Hosea 11:1. But when you go to Hosea 11:1 and read that whole verse in context, not chopped in half, basically they chopped this verse in half. It is obvious. All you got to do is go to Hosea 11:1. It says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Um, and let's kind of get back to the Forrest Gump model here for a second. Did you ever wonder why it took anywhere from 30 years to 70 years after the death of Jesus for these gospels to start showing up? I mean, the first gospel was Mark, and Mark was not written, and it wasn't written by Mark. It was written unknown. It was Mark's name was on it, but it's not written by Mark. Neither is John or Matthew or Luke. They're unknown who wrote them, but they're universally acknowledged that the the original Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write these. But why did it take 30 years for the first one to show up? And why did I mean John didn't show up for another 70 years after Jesus' death? It's not because the Jews didn't know how to write. I mean, obviously they had scrolls. They read out of the scroll. Um, when you ask Christian pastors or you ask Christian ministers why this took so long, you're going to get a couple of canned answers, and one of them is, well, the disciples really believed that Jesus was coming back, within a few days, and so they really wasn't worried about the historical aspect of this, and so they didn't bother writing anything down. Well, for 30 years, 70 years, I mean, people lived and died and didn't write anything down. You have to remember that a lot of the world's population of Jews did not live in Israel. I mean, you would think, I mean, almost as many people lived in Babylon at that time, which is modern day Iraq. And you don't think that someone wouldn't have thought that, hey, maybe we should tell the people in Babylon what's going on here. I mean, after all, the Messiah has showed up. Nothing, nothing in history. Yes, I know Josephus has two references to Jesus, but here again, even the Christian scholars admit that that's a forgery. And so it's just mind-boggling that history is absolutely completely silent on what this. In other words, let me put it this way: if 9/11 happened in 2001, and we're 20 years, 19 years away from this, next year will be the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. So, if not a single witness to that event was interviewed, not a single witness to that event wrote anything down. Not a single witness did anything for another year. And at the 20-year anniversary, you're asking them to write what they saw and heard. Do you think that they may have forgot something? Do you think that their recall is going to be as sharp as it was on the day that it happened? It just none of this is making any sense. And I can see why Christians are confused. I mean, they're intrinsically they know that there is a God, but what they're getting out of the Christian doctrine it doesn't add up. It's fishy. It's not concise. And so, and I guess a lot of people can say, well, even the Old Testament has its contradictions and everything. That's true, but the Old Testament is a different beast altogether. And we as Gentiles, once we start looking at something without the rose-colored glasses of Jesus, that Torah, that Tanakh, once it opens itself up to us, we're staggered by the wisdom of that. And I mean, I would certainly encourage, if you're coming out of a Christianity or just seeking anything, just seeking truth, do yourself a favor. Find some videos of rabbis talking about the creation, to hear about how the Jews view creation as opposed to how the Christians view creation. Most Christians still view creation, oh, it's 6,000 years, period. Man did not, there was no man before Adam. That's not that is not the case. The Jewish viewpoint is that there were multiple societies before Adam. And I mean, I live in near Fort Worth, and within an hour drive from here, there's a town called uh, Glen Rose, and Glen Rose is somewhat famous because of the Paluxy River. The Paluxy River has produced hundreds, if not thousands, of fossils of dinosaur tracks. And several years ago, there was, well, it'd be quite a few years ago by now, but a, a number of years ago, there was a discovery in the Paluxy River where they had a set of dinosaur tracks going north and south. Yep, try to get this straight. Going north and south. And then they had a set of human footprints going east and west. And those two sets of footprints intersected each other. Dinosaur going this way, human going this way. And it was, and they sawed them up, and they've carved them out of the limestone, and they're in a museum, I guess, they're somewhere. But when Christian pastors were approached with this, they had no good answers. Say, well, it was a pro magna. Well, it's not. If you're going to say that it was a pro magna, well, I can't say that word. Then you have to admit that there were civilizations before Adam. But anyway, the creation and how the Jews are able to decipher that, because we as Gentiles, we can't understand the Hebrew. We don't have the numerical values that they understand. We don't have the for the most part of us have the understanding of the Kabbalah that they have. And so when they start talking about this and how the creation was created, it is absolutely fascinating. And then you start there and you just keep going up, and it just expands and expands and expands. Unlike the New Testament, the more you study, the worse it gets. The more you study the Old Testament and dig into it, through being led by Jewish scholars and Jewish rabbis, it's absolutely fascinating. Yeah. So much for that. Let's go on. All right. Since I was successful that last time, I think I'll probably do it again. But let's set this up. The prophecy that Jesus was a Nazarene, we find that here in Matthew 2:23. And he came and dwelt in the city of Nazareth, so it might be fulfilled, which is spoken of by the prophets. Now remember that. Remember this. Jesus dwelt in the city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled. This is a fulfillment of prophecy, according to Matthew, that he should be called a Nazarene. So let's get back to where I was. Let me share my screen. And we'll have to wait a second for this to come up. Oh, good. We got there quick. Okay, so what we're going to look at. Okay, first thing I want to do here is I'm just going to type in Moses. This is Bible Gateway, by the way, and it's a word search. And you can see that if you type in Moses, you're going to get Moses from the Old Testament all the way down through the New Testament. So it's searching both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, with that, let's look for Nazareth. Nazareth. And this has to be done, of course, in the King James Version because of Strong's Concordance. Um, even though this is not a Strong's Concordance, but it's. And so here again, we look in here, and there is no Nazareth in the Old Testament. Not one occurrence. There's not one occurrence of Nazareth in the Old Testament. You go down here, and there you go. The first one that even talks about Nazareth is the one that we just read. And he came and dwelt in the city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled that he was spoken of by the prophets, that he should be called a Nazarene. Well, then maybe he was a Nazarene. So let's go back to the Old Testament and type in Nazarene. That's not working. Okay, there's only two Nazarenes, none in the Old Testament, and there's only two in the New Testament. One is obviously there, Matthew 2:23. So it says there that it was spoken of by the prophets. Okay, so it was a prophecy that was fulfilled. Well, it could not have been fulfilled if there was not a town or a hamlet named Nazareth, because then that would have made the citizens of Nazareth, Nazarenes. But it could not have been fulfilled. There was no city. So whoever he is that it was spoken of the prophets didn't speak about it. This is a completely made up prophecy. Well, then someone says, "Oh, really, 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 no, no, no." What they really meant was that he was a Nazarite, not a Nazarene, a Nazarite. Oh, okay. Okay, let's just do this. Here we go. There is such a thing as a Nazarite, and it is here in Numbers in Numbers in chapter 6. It talks about the Nazarite. Okay, and that in fact is let me just whole chapter. And this is what it takes to be a Nazarite. So let's just see if Jesus fulfills the qualifications of being a Nazarite. Maybe he wasn't a Nazarene. Maybe really what they meant was he was a Nazarite. Okay, so looking at here in verse 3, see if you got it. Yep. He shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and he shall drink no vinegar or wine or vinegar or strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. Going down a little further, his hair will grow long. And I'm looking for something else here. Okay, here it is, 6. And all the days he shall separate himself unto the Lord, and he shall come at no dead body. In other words, he shall not touch any dead body, not even if it's his mother, his father, his brother, or sister. He can't touch them. Okay, so he can't drink wine and he can't touch a dead body. Okay, now with that, let's go back. So This is in Judges, and it talks about the Nazarite. For behold, you shall see conceive a son, and this is actually talking about Samson. And no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, which is what they're claiming that Jesus is. And he shall reign and deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Well, Jesus did not deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. And then we go down, and this is and Israelites came again and did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Philistines. There was a certain man named Zorah, tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren, having no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said, although you were barren, having borne no children, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now be careful not to drink wine or strong drink or eat anything unclean, and you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come to his head. The boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth, and he shall deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. All the days that separate themselves to the Lord shall not go near a corpse. Okay. Jesus can't, if he's a Nazarite, if he's taking a Nazarite vow, he can't drink wine and he can't go near a corpse. A second, let me. Whoa, looky there. Let me read you the the scripture where this is from, and it's in Luke 8, chapter 8, 49 through 56. And while he was still speaking, someone came from the leader's house to say, your daughter is dead. You do not trouble the teacher any longer. When Jesus heard this, he replied, do not fear, only believe, and she will be saved. When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, the child's father and mother. They were all weeping and wailing for her. But he said, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. And they all laughed at him. Well, wait a minute. They were wailing and weeping, and he says, don't fear, she's only sleeping. Do not weep, she's only sleeping. And they started laughing at him. Well, don't you think if you were a mother or a father and someone offered you just a little bit of hope, you would say, oh, Jesus, are you sure? They laughed at him. Here again, the reaction just doesn't make sense. Okay, but he took her by the hand. Uh-oh. He took her by the hand. You're not supposed to touch a corpse. Well, he took her by the hand, called out, child, get up. Her spirit returned, and she got up at once, and he directed them to give something to eat. So Jesus not only touched dead corpses, he drank wine. He drank wine at the Last Supper. Um, so, at this point, it's just kind of it kind of just boggles my mind that we got a list of 365 prophecies, and a lot of these prophecies, well, no, there are some prophecies that kind of make sense where you can go, yeah, well, maybe I can see that, but the ones that we went over tonight are just completely made up out of and created out of pretty much out of thin air. I'm at a point here where I cannot finish tonight, and so I kind of like probably this is a good stopping point. So what I'm going to do is now we're going to from this point on we're going to go through 6 major prophecies of the Messiah that are legitimate, that they are agreed upon not only by the Christian scholars but also by the Jewish scholars as well. And it's undisputed that these 6 prophecies are legitimate prophecies, and then we will go through these 6 prophecies to see if Jesus actually filled any of these 6. And so what we'll do, I certainly didn't realize that it was going to take almost an hour to get through that, but that probably really should surprise me by now. But anyway, so what we'll do is we'll let me what we'll do is pick up here next week, and then we'll finish this up. And if we finish this up in a reasonable amount of time, then we'll go into the next session. And there's some oh man, there's some really good stuff in that next session. And so I mean, I hope you guys come back next week, and we'll pick up here. So with that, guys, I am going to stop the recording, and we will we will see you guys next week. Thanks.